Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Hi students, welcome to the session. In the previous session, we talked about the first process that occurs in the process of respiration, that was breathing. Now, in today's session, we are going to talk about how do we breathe. That means when we are talking about human beings, what are the organs that help us in breathing? And like in the previous session, we talked about that breathing is taking in of air through the with the help of the respiratory organs. So what are these organs and how do they help us in taking in air? We are going to understand this. Now, first of all, whenever you're breathing, the very first thing which happens is you must have noticed that the air goes into our nostrils, right? And from this nostril, it goes into our body. So what is the path that is followed by the air is, first of all, the air goes into the nostrils, and from the nostrils it goes into the nasal cavity, right? When it goes into the nasal cavity, after the nasal cavity, the air reaches the lungs, right? And from where does it reaches the lungs? Or rather, I should point out that before lungs, let's say, it goes through the windpipe, also known as trachea, right? And it goes to the lungs, right? When it goes to the lungs, over here, the process of respiration becomes complete. Now, from the windpipe, it goes to the lungs, which is situated in the chest cavity. Now, if we look at the diagram over here, we can see this is the nasal passage. This is the nasal passage or the nasal cavity. Then we have the trachea, that is your windpipe, and then we have the lungs present in the chest cavity. Now, there is another important part which is marked over here is the diaphragm, right? This is a muscular structure. Right, it is a muscular structure which forms the base, right, of the chest cavity. It is a muscular structure which forms the base of the floor of the chest cavity. Over here you can see it divides the chest cavity and abdomen. So diaphragm forms the floor of the chest cavity, and it divides, right? Hence divides the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity. Divides the chest cavity from abdominal cavity, right? So this is the floor. Now over here, if you see, we only talked about the air going from the nostrils to the lungs. So why do you think we are talking about diaphragm? Why we are saying that diaphragm is the muscular structure that forms the floor of your chest cavity? The reason to talk about diaphragm is that during inhalation and exhalation process, this muscular structure plays a very important role. We are going to see that how in coordination with the diaphragm and ribs the inhalation takes place. So over here in this diagram, I would like to also point out that if you can see, this lung is covered, or it is it is protected all round with the help of these ribs. As you know, these ribs are the bony structures which are protecting the essential organs like lungs and heart, right? So this is the rib, also known as the rib cage, and the lung is present in the chest cavity surrounded by the rib cage.
Respiratory system in humans. In humans and other mammals, respiration is achieved through the mouth, nose, windpipe, bronchus and lungs. Oxygen enters the respiratory system through the mouth and nose, and then it passes through the windpipe and the bronchus, which is a tube that enters into the lungs. Within the lungs, oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged. Oxygen is absorbed into the blood and undergoes respiration to provide energy.
So now let's move on and understand the process of inhalation and exhalation. The very first thing that we are going to talk about is inhalation. How does this occur in the lungs? And we already told you that the mechanism of breathing involves two processes. First is the inhalation process and other is the exhalation process. Whenever these two processes are complete, first inhalation and then exhalation, then only we say the whole breath is complete. So let's understand that how do ribs and diaphragm play a major role in causing both of these processes. First, let's talk about inhalation. So whenever inhalation takes place, the first thing which happens is that the diaphragm moves up. Now the structure of diaphragm at rest, if if you're not breathing, let's say you're holding your breath, the diaphragm is a curved structure, right? It is curved like this. When inhalation takes place, this structure goes down, right? The diaphragm goes down and the ribs move out. Two steps are taking place simultaneously. First is the diaphragm is coming down and the ribs is moving out. What happens because of this? These two things, the volume of the chest cavity increases. When the volume of the chest cavity increases, what happens because of this? When the volume of the chest cavity increases, the air rushes into the lungs. Right? So what is happening over here? Because of increase in the volume of the chest cavity, that means the space in the chest cavity is increasing and this causes the air to rush into the lungs. Right? This is the process of inhalation. Now when the exhalation has to take place, that means the air has to be pushed out of your lungs. What happens is that the diaphragm and ribs go back to their original place. That means they are now going back, ribs move back to their original state. And what was their original state? The diaphragm moves back. That means when the inhalation was taking place, the diaphragm became a little bit flatter, right? Thus increasing the space in the chest cavity. But when the exhalation has to take place, the diaphragm became the same way it was, that is curved towards the upward side, and the ribs again move back to their original position, right? So the expansion goes back to its normal position, because of which the air is pushed out of the lungs, right? So air is pushed out. So to understand this process, let's look at, so as you can see in this diagram, that whenever inhalation is taking place, the ribs are moving out, right? Over here, as you can see, ribs are moving towards outward, increasing the space in the chest cavity. When the exhalation is taking place, the ribs are going back to its original place. That means what they are doing is they are pushing the air in the lungs outwards. So inhalation and exhalation, you can see, are happening because of these two parts, that is your ribs and the diaphragm. That's why we were talking, when we were looking at the respiratory or diagram of the respiratory organs, we also included ribs and diaphragm in this, because both of them work together for the process of inhalation and exhalation to take place, right? Now, in this particular movement, this is a very subtle movement, and many times we do not even observe, we do not even feel it. But if you have to feel this expansion and contraction of your chest cavity, you simply have to keep your hand on the abdominal area and you will find that expansion and contraction of the activity of the chest is taking place, indicating that you are breathing, right? Now you can also observe your, say if your little brother or your elder brother is sleeping, you can also observe your parents while they are sleeping. You will see during sleeping also the expansion and contraction of the chest cavity is taking place, indicating the process and the mechanism of breathing. Once you have understood this, now whenever you are going to observe any of your friends, you can observe your parents, your siblings, you will see the expansion and the contraction taking place, and you will understand the process of the mechanism of breathing in a much better way. Right? Now, let's understand one more interesting phenomena, and that phenomena is known as sneezing. Now, this is one of the random things which happens, and what is the process, and there are so many things that we've heard that are associated with sneezing. Let's understand what exactly this particular process is. Many a time students, like for example, now as I'm sitting in my room, right, so as I'm sitting in this room, we are seeing that the environment here is dust free. That's why I am not able, there is no irritation in my breathing. I am breathing normally. I do not have any kind of problem. But when we are going into the area where we have a lot of, dust particles or pollen particles, these particles are basically the unwanted materials that might go into our breaths. Now, imagine that you are at your home and you are cleaning, say, a cupboard which was not cleaned for a very long time and has dust accumulated in it. What happens is that when you're cleaning the dust, some of the dust particles go into your nostrils and you start sneezing. What is the reason for that? Always remember that even if I am sitting here in a clean room, this doesn't mean that there are not unwanted particles. Definitely certain microscopic particles are there in the environment, but the hair that is present in the nasal cavity are able to capture, right? So, all of these unwanted particles like smoke, dust, pollens, right, etc. These are certain unwanted particles which are present in our environment. Whenever the amount of these particles increases in the surrounding area, sneezing takes place. When we are sitting in a clean environment, it's not like I said, there are still some microscopic unwanted particles, but they do not cause sneezing because the hair that are present in our nasal cavity, in nasal cavity, are able to trap the unwanted particles. Right? But when the amount of these particles increases, like when you are cleaning your cupboard which has a lot of dust, so the environment in that particular environment, the amount of dust particles increased. Then these hair are not able to, they are not able to trap all the dust particles, and some of the dust particles will go down into the. So some of these particles will not be trapped in the hair, and they will go into the nasal cavity, and what they will do is they will irritate it, right? So this will irritate the nasal cavity. Because of this irritation, the process of sneezing takes place. So why is it happening? Sneezing is that the air is thrown out of the body with such force that whatever is stuck in the nasal cavity gets thrown out, right? So when you're sneezing, it is, right? So when you're sneezing, it expels the foreign particle, right? So if you must have seen that when you're sneezing, it's with a lot of force. So that means the air is coming out of your nasal cavity with such force that the foreign particles which are there in the nasal cavity gets expelled, right? Always remember, students, that you should always cover your mouth and your nose while you're sneezing, because if suppose the sneezing is occurring because of some virus or some bacteria, what will happen that because of this, the air particles which contains the your virus and bacteria may go to a healthy person and may cause them to get sick again, right? So that means that suppose if you're suffering from common cold and you're sneezing, so the virus of the common cold will go to a healthy person and make them sick. That's the reason why we should always cover our mouth and our nose while sneezing, right? So this is all about this phenomena. Let's now move on and perform an activity which is related to the mechanism of breathing. And what is that activity? It's a very fun activity, students, which you can do with your friends. What you need is a tape, that is the measuring tape, right? You need a measuring tape and you need a table like this, right? Make this table, and over here what you're going to do is write the name of your classmates. Now, first you have to check the size of the chest, like as shown, as depicted in the picture. What you're going to do is, when a person is exhaling, measure the size of the chest, right? Ask the person to exhale and hold their breath for some time, right? So when they exhaled and held their breath, measure the chest size. You will find, suppose you find some chest size. Then during the inhalation, ask the person to inhale and then hold their breath. So again, you will find some measure of the chest size. When you have measured both of these things, you will find that inhalation, during the inhalation, the chest size was more as compared to the chest size during exhalation. You will be able to find out the difference between the two, and you can note it down in this particular column. And do this activity with all your friends and compare the chest size that is there during inhalation and exhalation. So it will explain that what is the expansion that is taking place during inhalation of during inhalation part of your breathing, right? Now, to understand the mechanism of breathing a little better, we will perform another very interesting activity. For this activity, what you need is a wide plastic bottle. Then what you're going to do is you're going to remove its bottom, right? Over here you can see the bottom has been removed. Then what you're going to need is a rubber sheet. Right? Or third, what you need is Y-shaped glass or plastic tube. Right, over here you can see this kind of Y-shaped plastic or glass tube. Then what else you need is 2 balloons, right, and you have to fix them like this. In this way what you're going to do is, you're going to set it up. That means on the you will put a cork on the opening or on the mouth of the bottle, and through that cork you're going to put this Y-shaped tube. Then you will remove the bottom of this plastic bottle, and then you put a rubber sheet over there. If you do not have a rubber sheet, you can also use a balloon, right? Now what you're going to do is that you're going to pull the balloon downwards. This balloon which was there on the bottom of the bottle, you're going to pull it down. When you will pull it down, you will see that the balloon will swell because of the air that is coming in through this tube. When you will release the balloon or the rubber sheet, it goes back, right? It goes back in its original position, and you will see the balloon will flatten. This is the process or the mechanism of breathing, and this is a model which indicates how your lungs expand and contract because of the diaphragm, right? So this model represents lungs and shows or demonstrates mechanism of breathing, right? It's a very interesting activity. I would suggest that all of you should do it so that you can visualize that how breathing is taking place in our body, right?
To demonstrate the function of diaphragm in breathing. Materials required: Y-shaped glass tube, 2 balloons, glass bell jar, thin rubber sheet, piece of string, a rubber cork. Method: fix up the Y-shaped glass tube with the balloons in the bell jar. Tie the thin rubber sheet around the bottom of the bell jar with string. This setup is comparable to the respiratory system in man. The bell jar is equivalent to the chest cavity and the balloons to the lungs. The rubber sheet represents the diaphragm. Now pull the rubber sheet down. The space in the jar increases and the balloons get inflated. When the rubber sheet is released, the balloons collapse. This is the way we inhale and exhale air with the help of movement of the diaphragm.
So I hope students you were able to understand the mechanism of breathing.